long and tiring day at work, I was heading home by train, taking the same boring route I traveled daily. I was 24 years old, and things weren't going very well at that time. I had to work in another city about 70 kilometers away. You might wonder why I didn't find a place to rent in the city where I worked to avoid the daily train ride. Well, that wasn't really possible because my mother was quite ill during that period, and I was the only one taking care of her. The effort was significant, but I earned enough money to manage and help my mother as well. In my mind, it wasn't a long-term job unless I found a place to rent in that city and my mother's health improved. So other factors needed to change for me to make a switch. As I mentioned, it was around 7 p.m. when I took the train home. The journey lasted about an hour and a half, and often when I reached the station where I had to get off, I was the last one remaining on the train. The other passengers would get off at earlier stops because my town was quite isolated, deserted, and sparsely populated. Despite this, it was actually a pretty nice town, at least the entrance to it, because being in a mountainous area, the scenery was incredible. Admiring the majesty of the mountains, the clear stream, the imposing fir trees, and the wild animals that could sometimes be seen along the train route. Unfortunately, these things could be admired more during the day, not when I arrived home at night due to it being winter. After an hour of travel, I had 2 more stops to go, the last of which was mine. Listening to music in my headphones amidst the loud noises made by the very old train, I noticed I was the only one left in the carriage. I was glad that I would finally be home and could relax in bed after a hard and tiring day at work. As sleepy as I was, this feeling was about to change. We arrived at the second to last station, and while listening to music and watching the snowflakes fall, I thought I saw something strange among the trees. The stations in those areas were very dimly lit at night, so I couldn't be sure if I saw something or if it was just my imagination. Among the trees, it seemed like there was something the size of a person, dressed in black. But the unusual thing was that it had a bag on its head, torn around the mouth area. Even though I couldn't see its eyes, I somehow felt it was looking at me. While staring in amazement and frozen at the window, I heard the conductor talking on the phone. I looked at him for a second and then looked out the window again, but that thing had disappeared. I didn't pay much attention to it since the train stayed only 2 minutes at the station. I was very tired and didn't see anyone get on the train. I assumed it was just my imagination due to exhaustion. Finally, I arrived at my destination and started walking home, as it took me 10 minutes on foot from the station to my house. I greeted the conductor and set off with a slight feeling of being watched, but I attributed it to fatigue, wanting to get to bed as quickly as possible. The town had very few residents, so at that hour you didn't see many people on the street. Plus, it was winter with a dead silence blanketing the entire town. At some point, I had the inspiration, if I can call it that, to look behind me. At that moment, my heart froze, pounding loudly, and my legs seemed to lock up. Exactly as you might think, it was the same person I saw among the trees. Normal stature, dressed entirely in black, with that bag on its head. I tried to appear tough, shouting, "Who are you? What do you want?" But fear was evident in my trembling voice. I received no response. It just stood motionless about 10 meters away from me. I started walking home again, but with quicker steps, constantly looking back to see if that thing was moving. Seeing it still in that spot, I began to calm down since I was only a street away from home. But things weren't going to be that simple. At some point, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. That person or creature started running with strangely long strides, moving at an extremely fast pace towards me. I could feel adrenaline and fear through my heartbeat, running as fast as I could, feeling the sharp, cold air cutting my breath. I don't know how I managed to escape and get home, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I looked out the windows for 2 hours straight, becoming paranoid, but I had a good reason. I didn't tell my mother because I didn't want her to worry about this on top of everything else she was dealing with. Lying in bed, I tried to think if it was real or just my imagination. He couldn't have reached the town because he didn't get on the train, as I would have seen him either getting on or off, and the distance from that station to the town would have taken him a long time on foot. Now the question is, did he get on the train with me and I didn't see him? Maybe he had a car and just wanted to prank me. But would someone go to such lengths for a prank? Or was it something real but paranormal? What is clear to me is that I exclude the possibility that it was just in my head because I could see his footprints in the snow while he was chasing me, and I could feel the terror emanating from him just by standing still and looking at me through that bag without saying a word. The next morning, on my way to the station to go to work, I was shocked by the discovery I made. Near the dumpsters of the building, I noticed a bag from a distance, and the closer I got, the more I felt a sense of unease in the air. It was exactly the same bag worn by the person or creature that chased me. I felt like vomiting, my heart pounding hard again, because this proved that everything was real. I didn't go to work that day telling my boss that my mother wasn't feeling well and I would stay with her, but the real reason was fear. I don't know who or what that thing was. I don't know how it got to town so quickly that night, but that image will probably stay with me forever. That thing standing motionless in the faint light of a street lamp, looking at me through that sack, emanating an atmosphere of unease, fear, and terror. While I was relaxing and watching a football match, I received a message from my mother asking, "When are you arriving?" I then remembered that I had promised to visit them this weekend to help with some work as they lived in the countryside, in a village 50 kilometers outside the city. I quickly packed my bags and headed to the train station. I had to take the train because I had exceeded the speed limit, and the police had taken my license for 2 months, so I was not allowed to drive. The only available train was at 9 p.m. because I had missed the 7 p.m. train. I told my mother that I would arrive a little later because I had to work overtime. When I got to the station, I bought a ticket and took a seat on a bench while waiting for the train. As the evening slowly set in, I received bad news. My train would be delayed by 30 minutes. There was nothing I could do. It was the only way I could get to my parents that night. I was the only person left in the station, as no one else would travel on a Friday night to a village 50 kilometers away, and the other trains had already departed, the only one delayed being mine. I was on my phone trying to pass the time until the train arrived. At one point, I smelled a very strong scent of old. While I was busy watching some videos on YouTube, I heard a voice behind me. "Hello." It was a tall, quite elderly man, but very elegantly dressed, in a suit with a hat and a cane to help him walk. "Do you happen to know what time the train on line 2 leaves?" "Normally, it should have left at 9, but due to a delay, it will leave at 9:30, I replied. "Oh, thank you. Good thing I didn't miss it," said the man as he adjusted his suitcase and sat on the bench next to me. When he sat down, I smelled the scent even stronger and knew it was from him, but there was nothing I could do. "My wife would be very upset with me if I didn't make it to dinner," he said. Hearing this, I looked a little surprised at him, as it was already past 9 p.m., and considering the travel time, it was quite a late hour for dinner, but who am I to judge? While waiting for the train with that man, he suddenly said, "Oh, I forgot to buy my ticket. I'll be right back." Seeing that he was quite elderly and moved very slowly using that cane, I said I would help and go buy the ticket for him. After all, I wanted to get some fresh air to escape that smell. He gave me a banknote for the ticket, but I didn't pay attention to how much it was because the ticket was very cheap, and I intended to buy it with my own money anyway. I went to buy another ticket, and I noticed that the lady at the counter looked a bit puzzled at me, recognizing me because I had been there 20 minutes earlier to buy my ticket. She asked, "Another one?" I said, "Yes, I want to do a good deed today." As I was returning to the bench where I had left the elderly man, I saw that the bench was empty. I looked around the area thinking he might have gone to the bathroom, but he was nowhere to be found. The whole situation was strange because the man moved very slowly, so he couldn't have left without me noticing. I tried looking for him for another 10 minutes, but to no avail. I thought he might have left another way while I was buying his ticket. Eventually, I heard my train arriving at the station after a long wait. I picked up my luggage and headed to the train, but something caught my eye as I was walking. A picture of a woman in a corner of the station. What was interesting was that the picture seemed very old. Or at least the person in the picture looked from a different time period a few centuries earlier. As I was walking towards the train, I asked one of the conductors if he knew who the person in the picture was and why it was in the station. The conductor explained that many years ago, a bloody crime had occurred in this station. A man had cold-bloodedly killed his wife, stabbing her 10 times with a knife, and then hanged himself in the forest next to the station. It is said that one evening, when no one else was in the station, the two were waiting for the train on the same route I was about to travel on, and out of jealousy, the man suddenly lost his mind and committed the gruesome act. Honestly, this was not the answer I was expecting when I asked the conductor, filling me with feelings of fear and paranoia. But I thanked him for the answer and continued to find a seat in the carriage. As I was traveling to my parents' village, I thought a little about that man, his face, his clothes that seemed quite old, and the pungent smell around him. I wondered if he was actually the man who committed the crime. I brushed off this theory, telling myself he was probably just an elderly man living in the area, with no other connections to that story. The conductor came to check my ticket. Everything was fine, but being a bit sleepy as I took the ticket out of my pocket, several things fell to the floor. While picking up my belongings, I noticed a different kind of banknote and remembered I had received one from that man. It was a very old banknote in the style of the 18th century, which made the whole situation much stranger and more eerie, complementing that crime story. At that moment, many scenarios were running through my mind, but one thing was certain. The banknote was real, which meant that man had to be real too. That doesn't necessarily mean he was the one from the crime story. However, when I think about the way the ticket lady looked at me when I was buying the second ticket, it was a suspicious look, as if I was the only one in the station and that man had never been there. I don't know if we can talk about a paranormal situation here, but what makes things more interesting is the moment when that man disappeared in a few seconds, despite moving very slowly with the cane, in the very old banknote I received from him, which leaves room for many interpretations of this strange event.